For more than 3,300 years, Jewry has yearned, long dreamt of the coming of the Messiah. So the Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin describes two very different scenarios which would lead to the coming of the Messiah. There the Talmud records, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Tat, Ein ben David ba, Ella b'dor shekulo zakai o kulo chayev. The Messiah will either arrive to a generation which is entirely righteous or entirely corrupt. In other words, either Jewry will return en masse to Torah. They'll use it to morally transform mankind, and the Messiah will arrive to congratulate us. Or Jewry will entirely abandon Torah. They'll be swallowed up in a burgeoning riptide of assimilation, and mankind will tear hopelessly down a course of complete and utter self-destruction. So we understand the latter scenario. Rates of white-collar and blue-collar crime have never been higher in the civilized world. The last century's most famous atheists, Stalin, Hitler, and Mao Zedong, killed more people than were killed in the Crusades, the Inquisition, and the Jihad combined throughout the rest of human history. Today, the most excruciatingly inhuman forms of torture are methodically being practiced by scores of governments worldwide. As Professor George Steiner from the University of Kent in Canterbury recently said, quote, "There is hardly a methodology of abjection and of pain which is not being applied somewhere at this moment to individuals and groups of human beings. And on top of all of this, even the most civilized nations fail to provide any sort of haven from spiraling human malevolence." Recent study at Stanford, conducted by Professor Donald Lund, revealed the following. Statistically, a child born anywhere in the United States of America today has a 1 in 200 chance of being murdered during their lifetime. A child born and growing up in high crime areas of certain cities like Atlanta or Philadelphia is far more likely to be murdered, a 1 in 50 chance. Children raised in the Tenderloin or Fillmore areas of San Francisco have a 1 in 70 chance of being murdered. And these rates are only the rates for murder. It ignores crimes that are far more common in America, like rape, which is 4 times as common. Selfishness is ubiquitous among the non-criminal. Divorce, spousal abuse, child abuse are at epidemic rates. One American state, and what I think might be a very significant move for all of mankind, recently passed a law allowing any 2 doctors with signed patient consent to perform euthanasia, putting to death an individual. And today, there are health maintenance organizations all over the world that are lobbying governments for similar laws in their states and countries in order to avoid the high cost of esoteric medical treatments. Private industries and governments worldwide prostitute themselves, providing the most lethal and horrific services for a price. And according to the latest statistics, Jewry, intended to be a light unto the nations and to help mankind out of this homemade hellhole that we've created, is in the process of committing cultural, sociological, and demographic suicide. So we live in darkness. And I can easily understand how humanity could dig itself into a pit so inescapably deep that only God could rescue us by sending the Messiah. So I understand very well the second scenario of the Talmud, but what I have difficulty understanding is the first scenario. How could it be that Jewry in a state this weak could morally transform mankind, turn the whole world upside down, and end the story so beautifully? And yet, the Talmud says that's a possibility. So what did the authors of the Talmud know that we don't know? Let's add some dimension to this question. Today, we, the handful of Jews who care enough about Judaism to make it a focus in our life, constitute less than 10% of Jewry, which constitutes about 1/3 of 1% of mankind. We possess the barest understanding of human beings, the most limited understanding of Torah, and we are bereft of the sorts of sages that previous generations possessed that could walk them through a crisis like what we're experiencing right now. Realistically, where is the hope? When God looks down on planet Earth right now, where does he see that there's a chance for mankind? When I step back and I look at human history, I think, okay, the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov failed to bring the Messiah. Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, failed to bring the Messiah. Rashi, Rambam, Maimonides, Ramban, Nachmanides, failed to bring the Messiah. Ravina and Rav Ashi, the codifiers of the Talmud, failed to bring the Messiah. Judah the Prince, the author of the Mishnah, failed to bring the Messiah. Mordechai and Esther failed to bring the Messiah. The Maccabees failed. Ezra failed. Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, they all failed to bring the Messiah. And we're going to bring the Messiah? The Talmud says that remains a realistic possibility in every generation, which includes our generation. How? When I step back today and I look at everything that's happening in the world, when I think about the headlines of the last week, when I think about what's going on in the last year or 10, when I see what's happened to intermarriage rates in Britain, in the United States of America, across Europe, down in South America, across the world, it's clear to me if I had to choose which of these two scenarios it's going to be, will it be the first very bright and beautiful scenario or the last very dark and frightening scenario? If I had to choose which one it was going to be, it's clear to me that the Messiah is going to come to greet a generation that has triumphed and made a spectacularly beautiful world. And I'll try to explain to you why I believe that. There's a Jewish principle described in the Mishnah, Lefum Tsara Agra. According to the struggle, so is the reward. Now, when the sages of the Talmud say, according to the struggle, so is the reward, they don't mean a reward that's synthetic, that for heroic performances you get 100 bananas. That's not what they mean. What they mean is that when you get to the next world, you get to experience exactly who you've built yourself into, who you've made yourself into. And therefore, to the extent that a person has made himself into a great person, to that extent he has a reward when he arrives in the next world. And when the Talmud says, according to the struggle, so is the reward, what the Talmud means to say is, according to the struggle, so is the greatness that you create inside of yourself. So is the light that you release into the universe. And therefore, theoretically, it's possible that if there would be a generation that would struggle terribly, that generation could release more light into the universe than any previous generation. It could be that externally, you and I might be less wise, we might be less refined, we might have achieved less insight than great sages from previous generations. But only externally. It could be that internally you can produce far more light. I ran across an interesting passage in the Medrash, a piece of Jewish oral tradition, commenting on the verse in Koheles, Ecclesiastes, in chapter 7, verse 10. Al tomar mehaya. Don't ask, what's happened? Sheyamim harishonim hayu tovim eila. The old days were much better than these days. Don't say that, the verse says. Amar Rabbi Brachya. Rabbi Brachya explained. There's a verse in Divrei Yamim that reads, V'yohayada hanagid la'aron. Yohayada was Aaron's teacher. That's the verse. Yohayada was Aaron's teacher. Okay. Yohayada lived in 950 BCE. Aaron lived in 1400 BCE. Yohayada was Aaron's teacher. Yohayada was separated by Aaron by 450 years. They never met each other. Yohayada was Aaron's teacher. What does that mean? And the Medrash explains, Eli'ilu haya Aaron kayim b'dor shel Yohayada. If the great Aaron HaKohen, the priest of Israel, Moshe Rabbeinu's brother, if he would have been alive 450 years later, during the generation of Yohayada, who was so much smaller objectively, Aaron would have gotten on his knees and begged Yohayada to teach him. And the reason is because someone's true greatness is not determined by factors that you and I can see with the eye. Their true greatness is determined by how much they struggle, by how much they're willing to work hard to step forward, even if it's very painful and very difficult. I have sitting in front of me an amazing manuscript. There was once a great Kabbalist who's popularly known as the Ari. Since he passed away, they call him the Arizal. Now, the Ari wrote very little, but he had a student who was prolific, Reb Chaim Vital. And Reb Chaim Vital had many very interesting conversations with this greatest Kabbalist of the 16th century. And Reb Chaim Vital recorded these conversations in an autobiography. So I have that autobiography sitting in front of me right now. And I'm going to read to you a conversation that took place between the Arizal and Reb Chaim Vital, his student. An unbelievable conversation which applies to you. What happened? The Arizal had just given a compliment to his student, Reb Chaim Vital. He said he was a very special person. And Reb Chaim said, how can you say to me, that my soul is so high? Hooray. The smallest person in previous generations. He was such a tzaddik and such a righteous person, such a pious person in previous generations that I don't reach that person's ankle. How can you say I'm so great? He asked his teacher. And the Ari answered, and he's speaking to you. Da. You must know. Ki gdulas hanefesh. The greatness of your soul. Eina teluya kafi ma'isa adam. It's not dependent on some objective scale of your behavior. Rak kafi hazman v'hador hahu. It's your behavior factored into the time and the generation in which you live. Ki ma'isa katan me'od, the smallest action, b'dor hazeh, in this generation, shakul kama mitzvahs b'doros harishonim, it's worth many, 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 many great mitzvahs in previous generations. Ki b'doros elu, because the Arizal said, in this generation, haklipa, the darkness, goveret me'od me'od ad en kates. It's incredibly powerful. It is blinding. The darkness is so thick. Masha'en came b'doros harishonim, and that was not the case in previous generations, where it was so much easier to be a righteous person. At the time the Arizal was saying this, down the block, Rav Yosef Karo was learning Bechavrusa partners with an angel. The Arizal at night used to ascend into the heavens. The darkness was very thick. Are you kidding? Compare his generation, the generation of Tzfas, of the great Kabbalists of Tzfas, to our generation. Did they have YouTube? Did they have a cell phone? Did they have any of the distractions that keep us from focusing? Did they have the divorce rates that we have today? The inability to connect with other people? Did they have the loss of Jewish tradition that we're suffering with? The rates of assimilation, the intermarriage? The darkness was very thick back then. How would you describe it today? So if back then, the smallest mitzvah that they performed was greater than the greatest mitzvahs of previous generations, what does that mean when you do anything? What's the source of our strength? It's our integrity. It's our courage. It's our willingness to step forward and do the right thing, no matter how difficult that might be. Okay. Tell me something. What are you doing here? I assume that the problem was it was too rainy in Scotland. Maybe all the tickets to Hawaii were booked. The hotels in Switzerland had no space. What are you doing here? Sitting in a classroom, trying to learn something about your heritage. What kind of a decision led you to this room today? So I have a word in my vocabulary for it. It's called heroism. It's called choosing to do the right thing even when it's not the most fun thing in the world. But it is the most moral. It is the most ethical. It's the most heroic. I assume that none of you get much honor for being here. Certainly you don't get an academic degree. And honor will go a long ways towards helping somebody do something difficult. The story is told that during the generation of the Vilna Gaon in Europe, there was a fellow in the Vilna Gaon's town who fasted all week, and he only ate on the Sabbath. And the children in that town were enamored with him. They were in awe. Every day when he would go to the mikveh, the children would wait outside the mikveh, and they would wait to see him when he walked out of the mikveh. Someone came to the Vilna Gaon, and they said to him, there's a very holy man in town, and he fasts all week. When he goes to the mikveh, all the children come to watch him come out of the building. So the Vilna Gaon said, tell the children not to stand there anymore. And when the children were no longer standing there, and that man walked out, and he saw that there was no one there watching him, he lost his strength to fast all week. The honor given by a bunch of little kids is enough to raise a person up to the highest heights of heroism, but you're not getting any honor for this. So how do you do it? So the answer is, you are flexing your free will muscle to choose to step forward. I want to confess something to you very personal. I've been on planet Earth now for more than 5 decades. And one of the things that I value the most are good friends. But I have very few close friends. I have very few close friends because I am very picky about who my friends are. But it's not because I'm not trying. I search high and low. I search all over the planet for these sorts of people. I met my two closest friends back in 1981. It was that summer I went on a leadership training program which accepted 80 students from all over the world, English speaking, to come and discuss how to make a better world. And the 80 of us spent 30 days on a campus together talking about how to make a better world. And there I met two people who are not only heroes, but I consider them my closest, my best friends. One of them I've spoken to you about before. Her name is Hannah, and I married her. And the other one is Alex. So I'll just tell you a drop about Alex. That summer, when we were discussing how to make a better world, Hannah and I decided we wanted to come and we wanted to learn something about Judaism because we felt that Judaism was the best way to make a better world. And we realized that Israel was a place to do that. And so we got on a plane and we flew to Israel and we started learning Torah here in Israel. Alex decided that he was ready to start defending Jewish lives. And he got on a plane also to come here with one intention, which was he wanted to join the Israeli army and he wanted to start defending Jewish lives. So Alex was in such a rush to get here that when he arrived, he immediately came in, he went straight to the Department of the Interior, made Aliyah, and immediately when he made Aliyah, he said, now please draft me. So they said to him, sir, once you make Aliyah, you have 3 months before the army will even talk to you, so you can relax and go enjoy Tel Aviv. And he said, no, I didn't come to this country to vacation. Please take me into the army now. And they said, I'm sorry, we can't help you. You'll have to go down and speak to the Lahaair, the army office here in town. And the next morning, Alex went to the army office here in town and insisted, please draft me now. Please take me into the army. So they gave him a physical and they found that he had asthma and flat feet. So they said to you, we don't need you in the army. If we draft you, we're going to put you on kotel duty. You're going to be down at the Western Wall, right, checking purses. And he said, please draft me. And they took him into the army, and as soon as he was taken to the army, he applied for admission to a combat unit. Okay? They said, you're not physically fit for a combat unit, and he fought, and he fought, and he fought until he got himself into a combat unit. His commander said, you'll be killed, you don't have the physical ability. He said, I can develop the physical ability, give me a chance. And Alex worked his way up to the top of this combat unit, and when he had reached the top of this combat unit, he took an officer's training course and became an officer of his unit. And at that point, as soon as he was elected an officer of his unit, he applied for a transfer to the paratroops, the Tzanchanim, one of the most elite units in this country. They said, you're physically not fit, you can't possibly survive as a Tzanchan, as a paratrooper. And even so, Alex said, take me. His record was so good, they took Alex into the paratroops. He worked his way up through the paratroops, taking an officer's training course until eventually he achieved his goal, became an officer in the paratroops, and applied for a transfer to one of the elite units that does the Entebbe type missions, the Entebbe rescue missions. Now, what's so amazing about Alex is not just his courage and that he's a warrior. Alex is a warrior like King David was a warrior. Alex is the most beautiful human being. He's a poet. And he's written some spectacular poetry. I have books of his poetry in my house. I have sitting in front of me a poem that Alex wrote on August the 17th, 1986. He was at that time training to take over the most elite combat unit in this country. And he wrote this poem in his diary. Once in a while, as I progress towards the course's end, I feel a pang of fear. If the war comes, when the war comes, I will have to lead men to die. And I will have to have the calm power to yell to them or to whisper, Kadima. Step forward. And I will have to have the calm courage to step forward myself. Alex only wanted to do the right thing. That's what drove him. That's what he obsessed over. He was terrified that the moment would come and he would fail. About a year later, on September the 15th, 1987, on Alex Singer's 25th birthday, his special unit was sent up to Lebanon to track down terrorists who had been lobbing Katyushas into northern Israel and killing innocent men, women, and children. Alex's unit was ambushed, and his commander was very badly wounded. Trapped behind enemy fire, his commander cried out for help. And my best friend, my hero, stepped forward to rescue another Jew. And he fell to a terrorist bullet on a rocky hillside in southern Lebanon. I don't have knowledge of what's happening in small Jewish population centers. Little cities and towns with populations of under 50,000 Jews. I do know that Denver's intermarriage rate is over 70%, Vancouver's more than 75%. There are cities throughout the southeastern part of the United States where Jewish life has ceased altogether, where the Gentiles are landmarking old synagogues as a reminder of Jewish communities that once flourished. There are 625,000 American Jews that are currently practicing other religions. 1 million American children, Jewish children, under the age of 18 are now being raised as non-Jews. There are 2 million American Jews who have no Jewish affiliation whatsoever. The intermarriage rate in Great Britain is anomalous. No one knows exactly where it is, but everybody agrees it's above 50%. There are people who have already written the tombstone for British Jewry. And the rest of Europe is involved in the exact same crisis. Within only a few years, simply because of intermarriage and assimilation, the majority of Jews on planet Earth are going to be living in Israel during your lifetime in the next decade. The rest of Jewry are going up in invisible flames. And what's more amazing is there is no uproar. There's no sense of urgency. There's no emergency meetings taking place. So far, 19 Holocaust memorials and 36 research centers or libraries of the Holocaust have been opened or are being built. Billions of dollars are being spent on commemorating dead Jews and pennies are being spent on real Jewish education. What's depressing about all this is never before in the history of Jewry has the community been led by an oligarchy, by a group of people who've achieved positions of leadership in the Jewish community by virtue exclusively of their pocketbook. Because they have more money than everybody else, they have the power to determine policy for the entire community. And therefore, terrible decisions can be made about Jewish education by people who know nothing about Jewish education. One need not be a veteran sociologist to see the handwriting on the wall. You are witnessing one of the last generations of Jewry in the exile. According to a recent report, there are about 2,000 Ba'alei Tshuva, Jews who return to their Jewish religious heritage every year, about 2,000. And every year, Jews for Jesus converts about 3,000 Jews. We have a message that we must convey. We have to teach it. You and I have to teach it, not to thousands. We must teach it to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of alienated Jews. We have to show them the beauty of Shabbos. We have to teach people that the wisdom behind the laws of Judaism governing sexuality have never been more relevant ever in human history. We have to communicate our message through love and through caring and through sharing. And we have to do it right now. And of course, the most powerful means we have for spreading this message, more than anything you will ever speak about publicly and more than anything you will ever write or publish, is your personal example. To the extent that you, a highly intelligent person who's thought about life and who constitutes the leadership of the next generation, to the extent that someone like you steps forward and grabs a hold of Judaism and makes it more a part of their life, that is the ultimate testimony that there's something valuable in the Torah. It's the ultimate advertisement for God's way on planet Earth. You're completing a few weeks of truly admirable Jewish learning here in Israel. And during this time, you've heard hours and hours and hours of lectures on the depth and wisdom of Torah. My guess is that sometime during all these hours, you heard something of value. Oh, that was interesting. That makes sense to me. You witnessed, perhaps, during your travels over the last couple of weeks, some Jewish custom, some Jewish behavior. You said, that is something I would love to have as part of my repertoire. There's something that touched you in the last few weeks. And that moment when you said, oh, wow. That's the question that's being put in front of you at this moment. You see, the whole world divides up into two kinds of people. There are those people who I don't have time to be friends with. I want to. I'd like to be close friends with everybody, but there just isn't time to connect with everybody. Contrary to Facebook, you can't have 10 million friends. So there are those people who, when a challenge is placed in front of them, they say, I'm going to do that. I am going to do that. I'm going to do that. I have to just finish college first. Then, as soon as I've got my career in place, but I should really get married. But once I get married, and then I've had some kids, when I've raised my kids, because it's very expensive to raise kids, I have to work, and I don't really have time to make any changes in my life right now. But once I retire, and then, before I die, or if not after I die, I'll make a change. And I've witnessed people walking through year after year, decade after decade, putting off changes which they knew were valuable, because I'm just too busy right now. And they come into this world and leave this world pretty much the same person, which is tragic. And then there's another group of people, and those people are my closest friends. And those are the people that make me think it's all going to work out okay. There are people who say, you know what? That is true. And that behavior is correct. And that way of living my life, whether it's making kiddush or honoring my parents, saying grace after meals or giving tzedakah, that is a correct thing to do. And I will make that part of my life, not when I retire, and not when I graduate, and not even next week, but today, before I walk through the door jamb of the building, I will take a step forward, a small step, and a week later I'll take another small step and another small step. Those are the heroes of mankind. And those people, through the difficulty, through the struggle, release tremendous amounts of light, a kind of light that can bring Messiah tomorrow. I said to you that the Messiah could come through one of two scenarios, and I confessed my bias. I believe it's going to be a beautiful scenario, and now I'll try to explain to you and show you exactly why. I'm closing my eyes, and I'm not going to open them until this little experiment is done. I'm speaking to you right now, and I'm not speaking to the person sitting next to you. I'm only speaking to you. And I'm going to ask you a question. I want to know if you saw anything of value in the last few weeks. If you heard something in a class which made sense, and you say, that will be part of my life. If there's anything that you're willing to take upon yourself, incorporate and enrich your life with before you leave this country. If that's the way that you're thinking, if you're that sort of person, then do me a personal favor. Please, if you're that person, please right now, stand up. You are the reason that I am confident that the Messiah is going to come to greet a heroic generation, and that he is just around the corner. Thank you very much.